What are you saying, geezers? Speci here. We are looking at Marvel Snap Zone's meta report, the most popular meta report in Marvel Snap. I've been very critical of this in the past, so I'm excited and optimistic to see if it has improved, and very interested to see where they've put everything. Meta's very fun and interesting and new. They have Shuri in Tier 1, which I can absolutely get behind. They've got a couple different versions of Shuri, which I think is a nice way of doing things as well. Sauron Shuri, of course, not being a very popular card. I personally think the Sauron version is not the way to go. I think it's a bit of a bait, personally, but I don't own the card, so I can't comment too much on that. And this list looks very nice. Up next, a different version of Shuri with Zero. I like this build in terms of the 1-drops, the Sunspot, the Zero, the Titania. What I'm not massively convinced by is the Zabu Enchantress Typhoid Mary. I think you definitely want to play Arrow still. Like, Arrow is just kind of insane. And the Zabu Enchantress Typhoid Mary all just seem a little bit out of place to me. I think it's very easy to overestimate how important it is to have Enchantress on Red Skull. Like, this is rubbish. Like, who cares about Red Skull's ongoing if it's 30 points and you have a Taskmaster? The lack of Zola is a bit of a concern for me as well. So this build I don't like. This one I do. Basically, this is very off, right? Like, the Zabu, the Enchantress, the Typhoid Mary don't belong here. And I want to be seeing a Arnim Zola. I want to be seeing an Arrow and something else. Maybe like a Shang-Chi or so. I don't know. Anyway. Up next, we have Zabu Control. So this is a Tier 1 deck, according to them. It's Sarah Control. It's just the difference is it's got Zabu in. KM Best posted this deck a few days ago. There's a big problem with this deck, which is that it loses to Deathwave. And Deathwave is all over the ladder right now. It's all over the place. You need Arrow in order to beat Deathwave, and it doesn't have it. I don't like the Zabu approach. I don't like the Enchantress. I think Enchantress is doing very little this meta. There's very, very few things that you really care about Enchantressing, with the exception of maybe Armor. So I think a better approach is no Zabu, no Rescue, no Enchantress. Play Sentinel, play Arrow, and then play another card in there as well. Okay. I also think this is probably a Tier 2 deck. I don't think it's Tier 1. It doesn't have a very good win rate, but should have a pretty good cube rate. I struggle to see it being Tier 1. I think it's probably Tier 2, but I can see where they put it in Tier 1. I do think it's a good deck. Control, Zabu, Darkhawk. So a similar looking list, but with Darkhawk added in. Pretty interesting. I can definitely get behind playing Zabu with this build, and this is one that I would like to try. I've not seen it at all. Pretty interesting concept, though. I mean, the Zabu makes a lot more sense suddenly here, right? But there's no Shang-Chi, so that's just weird. Okay, up next, a Zabu Darkhawk. This is with Devil Dino, this one. I think this is a very good deck as well. I don't see too much of it at all. Obviously, Zabu still being very good with Rockside and Darkhawk. I have a feeling that Absorbing Man and Spider-Man could be really nice here, because you can, with Quinjet and with Mystique, get Spider-Man and Absorbing Man pretty consistently down on turn number 5. Maybe just a Spider-Man, maybe not. No need for it. This list looks very, very solid. Can't really argue with it at all. Pretty tight list. The Agent Coulson's an interesting inclusion as well. I like the look of the list. Lockjaw on reveal makes it into Tier 1, which is surprising. I don't see it. I haven't played it, but I don't really see how this could be a Tier 1 deck. I think Tier 2, it's strong. It's not winning 8 cubes ever, really, right? And this build looks pretty good to me. I don't like Sunspot in Lockjaw decks. One thing I definitely like is the addition of Nightcrawler, but I would probably just be replacing the Dracula or the Jubilee for a Shuri. I think Shuri is great in these decks, and I think Sunspot doesn't really belong here. You don't really tend to skip too many turns with Lockjaw, apart from maybe like turn 2, and a lot of the time you're just going to Lockjaw or Jubilee into your Sunspot. I think this is a Tier 2 deck, but I can see where they put it in Tier 1. Kind of. Lockjaw Thanos. Now this I could get behind being Tier 1, and I think that's the problem. Like, Lockjaw on reveal and Lockjaw Thanos deserve to be 2 separate decks, because this is a Thanos deck with Lockjaw. The build here I don't like. This is actually, they've built it like round Lockjaw, whereas I don't think you tend to do that. You want Kazar, you want Blue Marvel. The armor's nice for sure, but it's way too top heavy for my liking. Like, the Infinite, the Magneto is too much on all in on the Lockjaw. You don't tend to need that. You would just rather have like a nice curve. So cards like Okoye, cards like Spider-Man I think are particularly good here. Storm I think is amazing in this deck, and Baku. But I do think that Lockjaw Thanos is a Tier 1 list. Again, I wouldn't be playing this particular version of it. And I think Lockjaw Thanos is a lot better than Lockjaw on reveal. The big downside of this list at the moment is the prevalence of Killmonger in the meta because of Deathwave. So definitely armor, nice at dealing with that. But also, those decks are very easy to spot a mile off, so you can just concede for 1 cube against those. I think Lockjaw Thanos is tier 1. I think normal Lockjaw is tier 2. I think Zabu should, with darkhawk, should probably be a tier 1 deck, although I haven't played against it much. And I think Zabu Control is tier 2. And the list should look quite a bit different, but quite close. Okay, so that's my review of tier 1. So far, I'm pretty impressed. I like the approach. I do think they need to distinguish between some of these decks a little bit more, like Thanos should be its own deck. I don't particularly agree with everything, but all the decks in tier 1 are good. Pretty well built overall. So, good job so far. While I don't agree with it, obviously it's subjective. Okay, up next we have tier 2. Finally, Marvel Snap Zone have put Galactus in tier 2. They've had it in tier 3 for a long time, and I thought that was always quite odd. But it's in tier 2, and right at the top of it, I think this is definitely a very strong tier 2 deck. Maybe tier 1. Honestly, I think Galactus is quite underrated still. I don't have the card myself, so I can't comment too much. But I have played against it a lot, and I know that it's very good, even in open deck lists when I've been doing some practice. For tournaments against Galactus, I've been getting wrecked by it. Galactus has a whole bunch of different builds. This one looks very strong. The Nightcrawler I was a bit surprised by, but my chat tell me that it's because you can play Nightcrawler and then move stuff away to surprise with Galactus. Cloak does a similar thing. You can keep your opponent guessing. The Spider-Man, I just think should always be good in Galactus decks, although a lot of people have cut it. The Leech, the Octopus, the Null, the Chavez, the Death, the Wave, the Electro all auto-include. This looks like a really strongly built list to me. The other version that I've been seeing of Galactus, which looks very interesting, is with the double Goblin and Shuri. So you can Green Goblin, and then Shuri, and then Hobgoblin, and then just Galactus on the final turn, and often your opponent just doesn't have enough points possible to beat Galactus on its own, and you can have like a Wolverine into that location, maybe even a random M'Baku as well. This is definitely a solidly built list, and I agree with it being tier 2. Up next in tier 2, we have Zabu Negative, and they have a few different Mr. Negative decks. I personally am not convinced that Silver Surfer is the way to go. I think just a more traditional value deck is better, because Silver Surfer is obviously not costing 0 anymore. But there's also a big lack of magic here, which I think no magic in Mr. Negative decks is very troll as well. So I can see this definitely being a tier 2 deck. They have a few different versions, but none of them have magic, which I think is a little bit weird. But I can see why they've gone for these. They've gone for a Negative Panther list as well. Not something I've played, but okay, sure. They've just given 3 different options for Mr. Negative, which I think is cool. And a darkhawk Mr. Negative version. This looks pretty interesting as well. Although there's not really any ways of clogging your opponent's deck. This darkhawk is just a value card that you just kind of throw in here, right? Yeah, I mean, I think the version that I play, which is more value orientated, should also just be in here too. But these are all solid looking decks. I can get behind them. I don't think any of them are super optimal. Without magic in any of them is quite a surprise. But I agree with them being in tier 2. They've offered lots of different versions, and they're all reasonably well built. I just think it's a bit surprising that there's no magic. And yeah, I definitely need to try some Silver Surfer Negative myself, because it probably is still pretty good. Okay, next we have Deathwave. I'm very glad this got put into tier 2. Lots of people have been saying this is the best deck in the game. I don't believe it for a second. I think this deck is very overrated, probably the most overrated deck in the game. Honestly, I think this could even be a tier 3 deck when the meta develops more, but it deserves to be in tier 2 for the moment. This deck is all about playing Wave on 5, and then on turn 6 you can go Death, She-Hulk, and Arrow. The thing is, it's very predictable, so you should never really be winning more than 4 cubes with this one. Of course you do, because people get surprised by the She-Hulk a lot of the time, the Death a lot of the time if they don't do the maths. Arrow is, of course, very powerful, but as the meta develops more, there's more leeches, there's more arrows, and this deck is very weak against both of those cards. Okay, we have Patriot in tier 2. Yeah, I don't think so. This is a no-no for me. This is not a tier 2 deck. I don't see Patriot at all. I don't see how it could be tier 2. Maybe I'm underestimating it. Maybe I need to try it, but do we really think Patriot is in the meta enough for it to be in tier 2 alongside these other very popular decks? I would say no, but maybe I need to give Patriot a fair try. There's not many Enchantresses in the meta at the moment, so I can see an argument for it. Of course, there's a lot of Killmongers, though, right now, which are going to deal with the Squirrel Girl, the Misty Knight. But you can Ultra on the final turn. I do honestly really like the way this list is built, though. It looks like a really nicely built deck, and it's something that I'm quite interested to try. Okay, they put it lower tier 2. Personally, I put it in tier 3, but okay. Our next, Patriot Surfer. As an alternative, I definitely agree that this is not the best way to play Patriot or Silver Surfer. Again, I don't really see this being a tier 2 deck, but more of a tier 3 deck. Okay, tier 3. Moving on now, we have Discard Lockjaw. I agree with this being a tier 3 deck. How is the list looking? I don't like the lack of Blade. I don't like the Moon Knight or the Swordmaster. They have no Sith, which is fine. They have Infinite, which is fine. It's a pretty interesting build with Dracula Infinite. I kind of like that concept. I do personally like playing Blade. I do think Gambit should be in this one with Lockjaw over Swordmaster and Moon Knight. I think Gambit is just a better option. List just looks a little bit off to me though somehow. I think Blade is very, very good here. Because a lot of the time, like on 5, you can go Hellcow Blade or you can go Dracula Blade. I can see the reason for not wanting to play it. I just think it's pretty flipping good. I do like the idea of Infinite Dracula. List looks pretty good. Again, Moon Knight, Swordmaster just sticking out to me as being a little bit odd. And I do agree with it being a tier 3 deck though. Okay, up next, we have Discard Dracula. Very similar deck with a Collector. I think you could make an argument to play Collector in this list as well with Lockjaw. This looks pretty nice. I think with Collector, you want Helicarrier, which there is no Helicarrier here. So Helicarrier could probably make the cut. Maybe Dracula goes, but maybe I'm just underestimating how good Dracula is. I just find Dracula quite awkward at times with Lockjaw. A lot of the time just doesn't do anything, right? This looks like a pretty nice list. They actually do still have the Lockjaw, which I agree with. They cut the Infinite. This looks solid. I like it. I think, again, the thing that I would replace is Gambit for Swordmaster if you're playing Lockjaw. I think Gambit is very underrated in these decks. This list looks good. Yeah, cool. Then they also have a Discard Zabu version, which is bad. I'm not going to talk about this one too much, but it's an alternative. Fair enough for putting it in as an alternative. Devil Dinosaur Good Cards is in tier 3. I can get behind this as well. We saw a Devil Dinosaur Darkhawk deck being further up. This is playing Zabu. There's a Shang-Chi. I think this is another deck which wants to play Mystique and wants to play Spider-Man and Absorbing Man to make this a little bit better. But the list looks very reasonable, and I can agree with it being a tier 3 deck. Hella Discard, I don't think deserves to be tier 3. I think this deck is trash. So this should be like tier 4. No way is this tier 3. How's the list looking? List looks fine. Magic, I think, is actually kind of underrated in these decks because if you put Hela into the Invisible Moon lane, Magic doesn't increase the length of the game. I like the Jubilee. Deck looks good. Electro Hela, Lockjaw Hela, I think is solid. And then Cerebro 2, I don't see so much. Hazmat is a bit random. With Luke Cage, yeah, I don't see that at all. This deck looks good if you just get rid of the Luke Cage and the Hazmat for 2 better cards, right? Like, there's so many good options. There's Scorpion. There's Mr. Fantastic. There's all sorts of amazing cards to play here, and I don't think Luke Cage and Hazmat are the ones. So they also had a mention of Silent Performers of the Week. Let's see if we can find that. Was it at the top? Silent Performers of the Week. They have Thanos Ongoing Zoo, Surfer Move, and She-Hulk Combo. Okay. Thanos Ongoing, I have seen a little bit. It's pretty similar to just like normal Thanos, but with a spectrum. I think normal Thanos is better. Surfer Move is worse than normal Surfer. I don't like this deck personally. I've played it a fair bit. I wanted to give it another try and I wasn't too impressed. But nice mention. I do think it's probably a decent deck. I think Surfer's very underrated in general. And then She-Hulk Combo. This is like Magic She-Hulk Infinite. I could also see this being decent and winning some cubes. So pretty nice little mentions. Overall, this Meta Pro is so much better than it has been previously. Great job, Marvel Snap Zone. Big up. If I'm being critical of it, what would I change personally? I think that I would probably, this Sarah Control deck should be in tier 2. I think Lockjaw should be in tier 2. I think Thanos should be tier 1, which is a kind of Lockjaw deck. So basically I would be putting Thanos as its own, like I would be separating these as 2 different decks. I think Thanos, I think Darkhawk and Shuri could all be tier 1. And then I think maybe Galactus could honestly go into tier 1. I would probably put Galactus in tier 1, I think. I think Galactus is very, very underrated. Okay, and then in tier 2, I like a lot of the tier 2s. I think Patriot should be going down to tier 3. And obviously a couple of these. I think Lockjaw should be in tier 2. And Sarah Control should be tier 2. Patriot should be tier 3. And the rest is pretty much fine. And yeah, apart from that, good job, Marvel Snap Zone. And obviously, It's just my subjective opinions. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments what you think. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching. See you on the next one.